So Shadowlands is coming out in just a few weeks, and they're still changing Shadow Priest. Let's go over what's changed because, man, they keep iterating on the spec. I'm very thankful for it. We've had another great round of changes this week. Let's go over exactly what's changed. Okay, so the main thing that's changed this week is Shadow Crash. So they've done a lot of different things to soulbinds and other things, but let's go ahead and start off with the big one, which is Shadow Crash. So what they did was they recognized that, the feedback that I, myself, and others people have given on the forums and elsewhere is that the new version of Shadow Crash just doesn't live up to the hype or honestly anyone's expectations of what the spell should be good at or anything like that. So before it was just kind of like 3 charge spell. It was a little bit complicated about when you would want to use it. And effectively from a sim perspective, it was never worth using almost ever just because of how awkward it was to use and just the opportunity cost for such a low quality spell. So what they've done is they've actually mostly reverted the spell back to what we have currently inside of BFA. Very, very similar to that. So if you're not familiar, it's still the same projectile spell. It just has 1 charge now instead of the 3. That cools down every 30 seconds. This is a bit, I don't know if this is a bug or intended though. It is a 30-second cooldown, but that cooldown is not hasted, which it is inside of BFA. So right now it is just a static 30-second cooldown ability that generates 20 insanity, which is a lot, especially relative to some of our other spells. The reworked one only generated 8 insanity. The other big change is that it is, again, just an AoE within all targets within 8 yards. That part's the same. So for the most part, you're looking at, it's good old Shadow Crash, what we're used to, right? They did buff the crap out of it in terms of its actual spell power modifier is 170% of spell power, which is pretty massive. That row, if you guys have been paying attention to any of the sims lately, has been pretty much a non-compete row. Like we basically just going to take AS more or less all the time. Psychic Link is terribly weak. And they've actually nerfed AS a few times, and that's still working out to be that way. That row just isn't a very large increase. But what we found, though, is that, Shadow Crash right now, or at least in preliminary sims, and again, everything is running in the background right now, is actually looking to be extremely strong insofar that you'll probably take Shadow Crash in everything except for when you have spread targets, right? So if you take a scenario with, X amount of targets, as long as they're all within that 8 yards of Shadow Crash is probably going to be better in that scenario. Again, AS has a bit more of a ramp required to it in that you do need Vampiric Touch active on all those targets to get that benefit or that extra benefit from the talent. Again, that's going to be great for spread targets. And there are a couple fights on Castle Nathria where that is going to be very relevant, including Denathrius. So I think AS will still have a place, but in any scenario where it's just 1 target, assuming you can actually aim that Shadow Crash, it's going to be probably better. Now, the other big change they made in terms of like the rework to this one, since we now reverted back, they did revert the travel time change. So the travel time of Shadow Crash is now fixed at 1.5 seconds, I believe. So you don't have to worry about that thing kind of flying all over the place or taking very long at 40 yards. It should be very consistent how long it's going to take to land no matter where you place it within that 0 to 40 yard range. So all great things. I think in general, I'm not a very big fan of Shadow Crash personally, and I think primarily that's just because adding another button to the rotation is a little awkward, but we'll make it work, especially considering, depending on what Sim's saying, for like pure single target, we might have Void Torrent and Shadow Crash, which will be a little interesting to play around with, but it will definitely help out with any of you guys that are like kind of scared of the kind of boring part of just mind flaying a lot in between your Void forms, so this might help out with that. So there you go, guys. And I will say the gap in that single target sim is very, very small. So if you hate Shadow Crash, you taking AS isn't that big of a hit. It's basically like equivalent to not having an enchant on a couple of your pieces. So it's really not that bad. But, again, let's hold off on the sims there. The link in the description to the charts website will be updated as soon as I get those sims out. So be sure to check that out whenever you get a second. Okay, so that's the big change from this build. Overall, I think generally positive. They tried an experiment with Shadow Crash. Either didn't have time to iterate on it or didn't like the direction it was going, so they just reverted it. All things good. Let's kind of start back from the top. What else changed in this build? It's kind of like my weekly update on the builds. They're doing a lot of crazy stuff, and again, the expansion comes out in a few weeks, so who knows. They did do a little bit of a rework. It kind of looks like a buff to a Nightfae Soulbind Nia. The Grove Invigoration thing got a little bit of a rework, so that might help Nightfae out a little bit. Again, the Nightfae Covenant ability is still terrible. It's basically not a DPS increase to press, so that doesn't really help us out very much, but again, that will kind of diversify the Soulbinds a bit better. The other thing I wanted to call out is that right now, if you guys have probably noticed in the charts website, Kyrian is like off the charts, like far and beyond the best thing in the world right now. And that's just because the Pelagos Soulbind is just frankly overpowered. They did nerf one of his traits that makes it good, although it's not going to be enough to balance it out. I think they need to go further. Pelagos, if you don't know, for free, without sacrificing one of your potency conduits, you get 2 Soulbind abilities and 2 potency conduits, right? That's not a choice. A lot of the other Soulbinds is, if you want the 2 Soulbind trait abilities, you have to give up one of your potency conduits. Not for Pelagos. Pelagos, you can get all 4 of those for the cost of just the normal Soulbind as everything else. So, frankly, they just need to fix that. It's just way too overpowered. If they fix that choice and then balance around that like everything else, that would just be better. This just feels like a massive oversight. So hopefully they keep going with that. That's all the kind of generic stuff. So moving on to the rest of the Shadow Priest changes specifically. They actually removed Shadowman rank 2. So I don't think I've ever talked about this on the YouTube channel, but basically they added a Shadowman rank 2 before that was like a self-healing buff when you cast it. It was kind of random. No one was really expecting it, but we got it. So they've now removed that, instead given us a rank 2 for silence, which is really interesting. I know I've been probably the loudest person complaining about our lack of utility. They didn't exactly address my concerns, but they did address part of something that a lot of people have been talking about, which is the range of silence. I think silence is one of the kind of weirdest interrupts in the game, in that it was just a 30-yard range silence interrupt. So they actually made it a rank 2. I don't exactly know what level that's available. It looks like 56 according to Wowhead. So at 56, the range of silence gets increased by 10 yards, making it a normal 40-yard interrupt. Great change overall. Very happy with this. I wish they went a little bit further in my suggestions with the last word talent, but that's okay. And then moving on, we had a couple other changes to legendary effects. So this is probably akin back to they made a post forever ago saying they're going to buff these guys. So they've now... So they nerfed Call to the Void's proc rate before from 2 procs per minute affected by haste down to 1. They realized that was probably a bit too much, which I fully agree with, and bumped that back up to 1.3 procs per minute. So not quite as strong as it was before, but definitely a slight little nerf here, which will help it out, I think, because the Sims were actually starting to say that Talbotars is winning and like closer and closer in composite, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think this will help out with that. I will say a small thing. I still don't know if this is a tooltip problem or a bug. Eternal Call of the Void is only generating 1 insanity per target hit for the Mindseer Void Lasher tentacle. The tooltip does say it should be 3 insanity every 1 second, so I don't really know. It just feels like the tooltip hasn't been updated, or it's a bug. We got to figure that out. But there you go. Slight buff to Eternal Call of the Void legendary. And then they also buffed Shadowflame Prison by about 15%, which, might help it a little bit, but honestly, I don't think this is enough. It got cut in half of a month or so ago, and it's just been kind of struggling ever since then. But we'll redo the Sims, see where things land after that. And guys, the last big change, I'm not going to cover that too much in this video, but they actually reworked Unholy Nova. We had a feeling this was coming, although it was kind of getting a little bit up to the wire there on getting this out. But Unholy Nova was, they accidentally put forward a new rank of it that made it a range cast ability. So now that is back into the game. So Unholy Nova has been reworked to be, instead of a melee AoE, it's now kind of a hybrid spell. So Unholy Nova, the actual the thing you cast is actually now a projectile that flies towards your target, whether that's an ally or an enemy doesn't matter. And then when it actually hits that target, it radiates healing to allies within 15 yards and then applies a dot to any enemies that are within that 15-yard range. So that travel time does take a few seconds depending on how close you are to that target, but it's no longer a radiate from your character. It's now from whatever thing you are targeting. So it is kind of a bit of an interesting change there. So it does kind of change up a lot of the problems we have with it, specifically in a raiding environment. Doesn't really change how you use it very much. You still kind of want to use it on cooldown, but again, you now want to keep in mind on who you're actually casting it on, because that does matter now. And they also did a little bit of another tweak here, which is very interesting. They actually added square root scaling onto the actual dot itself. As far as I can tell, this hasn't been done before. They've done a lot of square root scaling of spells in the past, but not from a dot specifically, which is very interesting. So if you don't know what this is, basically, so it starts at 375 spell power per the dot's tick. So if you're fighting one target, every tick will deal 375% spell power. But then if you add a target, meaning you hit 2 targets with that initial dot, instead of each one ticking for 375, they actually get square root divided by the square root of how many targets they're at, which is 2 in this case, meaning each target gets hit for 265% of spell power-ish. meaning you have a total of 530 spell power ticks going out. They did this change to give it a better viability perspective in terms of like single target and two target. Past two targets, it's basically a DPS loss, or very close to break even. So it's kind of an interesting change. It's like definitely better from a rating perspective because again, you can cast it at range now. It has much more viability or strength on single target, which again is great for rating. Although for Mythic Plus, this is definitely an overall nerf in my opinion. Even in the cases of like Tyrannical and stuff like that, I think this is an overall nerf to that, which is kind of sad to see. But again, you will get better single target, so maybe that's what you wanted instead. So still going to be a very strong ability overall. Right now, it does feel like it's a little overtuned. Sims are in progress, but you know, just from testing in game, you can see it's doing a lot of damage. So we'll kind of see how things shake up. But overall, a great rework. It just has some kind of awkwardness with how you use it. So this video is already like 10 minutes long, so I don't want to get into deep too much. So look forward to a video coming out probably tomorrow going in depth on the Unholy Nova changes and rework. And we'll kind of talk about how all of that works and things like that in that video. But guys, that is it for this video. Big thanks to all the patrons that are supporting me. And, you know, thanks for tuning in to all these great weekly updates. Couldn't do without the support of those guys for sure, though. And I'm sure I'll be back next week for another update. So again, if there's anything else you guys want to see coming into Shadowlands, I have a lot of videos kind of in the pipeline, but curious to see what you guys think of these changes or future changes you'd like to see. And again, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.